put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out themichaeldukesshow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Well, hello and good morning to you. Thursday edition of the Michael Dukes Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator, and around the world at michaeldukeshow.com on the interwebs. Hi, how are you? Oh, man, this week is going by fast, isn't it? It's a little bit crazy. Crazy what's happening out there in the world. Welcome to the program today. We have got a jam-packed show for you this morning, including a bunch of candidate interviews, some stories, some news, and, well, so much more. So much more. Welcome to the program. You guys ready to do this thing? Let's delve down into what's going on. All right, so here in just a few moments, about 10, 12 minutes or so, we're going to be picking it up with our first guest of the day. Today is kind of a peninsula-centric day. Doesn't give you guys the excuse in Fairbanks not to listen up in the interior, because there's some important stuff that's going to be discussed. In hour one, we're going to be talking with Ben Vincent, who is running for State House. He is running in District 5, which is the new District 5, and that is down in the Kodiak area. He is making a run against the incumbent, Louis Stutes. And we're going to get his full take on why this young man decided it behooved him to do those things. We're going to talk with him here in just a few minutes about that. We'll get his take in hour one. Then in hour two today, we're going to move up just slightly north of there, and we'll be talking with Heath Smith. Heath is running for the Senate in District C, and that is the district currently held and ruled over by Gary Stevens, and that is the Lower Peninsula and the Kodiak area as well. And so it's, again, kind of a peninsula-centric deal today, but it's going to give us a little bit of insight into some of the people who've decided to throw their hat into the ring against the incumbency and some of the problems and people down in Juneau. So this should be a very interesting discussion, and we're looking forward to cracking that open here in just a few moments. Meanwhile, we've got some headlines, and we got. I don't even want to do any of these headlines. I'll be honest with you. I saw something last night that really made me think, and it came up with a new word, a new phrase that I thought was really appropriate. I was watching a show that my wife and I have been enjoying, and there was a segment in there about just all the bad news that's out there, and how if you want to keep people engaged and you want to keep them, hopeless and helpless and basically turned up about everything, that you want to keep them doom scrolling. It's the doom scrolling. And that's about all the bad news. I mean, it's just like the Drudge Report, right? All the headlines, all the bad headlines you could ever want on Drudge Report. Recession, GDP, second straight quarter drop. The Fed is hiked again. Vox layoffs, government's fuel prices up. The thing and the other deal and the all the bad stuff. And it won't be. It just like the whole thing. Just doom scrolling, and I thought, yeah, wow, that's really appropriate. Doom scrolling. So I guess I've got a couple headlines just for the just for that. There are a couple local headlines that may get you, but we're also going to do the good news. The good news. I started this segment a couple weeks ago, and you know what? It was a hit with me. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but I enjoyed just a few stories of the good news. And so I will hit you with a couple headlines here from the state first, and then we'll jump right into it. We don't have a whole lot of time here this morning, so we'll get started here in just a second. Tragedy in Fairbanks yesterday, as apparently a young boy shot several of his siblings and then took his own life. Not a lot of details coming out, and quite honestly, I just don't need even to know the details other than this tragedy is just that, a tragedy. I hope everybody comes together for whoever this family is. Apparently, they had 7 children. There's 7 children because this boy shot himself, 3 of his siblings, and there were still 3 siblings remaining at home. Apparently, mom and dad were out at the time. I don't know what was going on, but it's a tragedy, and I feel bad for everybody involved. So that was the first doom-scrolling headline that I hit this morning on the way out. Definitely not the way you want to start your day. Some high pressures are hitting up in the whole state of Alaska. Expect some warmer weather to kick back off as a ridge of high pressure continues through midweek and into the weekend. They're going to have some rain down on the Gulf Coast this weekend, but we're going to see warmer temperatures, although there is still there's some termination dust up in the hills, which, I mean, it's July. We don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about that. Snow in the hills. There's snow in them there hills, but we don't need to talk about that right now. But yeah, it should be warmer here over the next couple weeks as this high pressure system gets through. So that's a little bit of good news. Then down in Whittier, a boat exploded in the launching bay, the launching dock. Apparently, the boat was being, and there's pictures of it. You can see it in a couple of the different news outlets. The boat had been backed down into the water and was on the edge of the dock when apparently it just literally exploded. A woman was injured. She had some burns and had to be airlifted by helicopter to Anchorage for treatment. There's no word on the extent of her injuries. Basically, the city manager said there's nothing left of this boat. So whatever it was, it burned it right down to the ground, or in this case, to the water line. And but apparently she survived and is out, and that's good news in that regard as well. I'm trying to find the spin on all this stuff to make sure that it's good news. What was the other one that caught my attention? This was great. An Oregon man who had been setting fires in the wilderness, in the remote forest areas, was apprehended by 3 local residents. Apparently, they had been looking for this guy who had been setting fires. He'd been walking along gravel roads and BLM roads and setting fires in the forests about 25 miles northwest of Grants Pass, Oregon. The local residents had been quick to try and put the fires out. They did get them put out. Meanwhile, 3 other local residents located the suspect walking on the road near the fires and detained him. This is my favorite part of this whole story. According to the Curry County Sheriff, John Ward, He said it was reported that the suspect became very combative with the three residents and they had to tie him to a tree to subdue him. An ambulance crew was asked to respond due to some injuries that the suspect apparently received from falling down. I'm sure that's exactly how he got those injuries, was from falling down. He fell down. And the sheriff's like, yeah, he fell down. It really is not a laughing matter. This guy, Heath Smith, is being held on charges of arson and reckless burning. The area where the fires occurred is only accessible by the Rogue River or the Forest Service and BLM roads. There were a lot of lodges are nearby in the remote region. He said, according to Ward, if the fires had not been contained and if they had got out of control, they would have blocked all the residents and visitors having an escape route. So if the fires had continued, it would have trapped all these people in the forest fire and not being able to escape. So anyway, but good news. Don't worry, he fell down. That's exactly what it was. He fell down, multiple injuries from falling down. 2 stories for the good news. Taking a leap of faith, a young Haitian man had decided to change his life. Back in 2017, a 22-year-old man named Jimmy Amisal, who was from Haiti, came home to visit his mom during a break from studying at Texas State University, where he'd been studying communications and electronic media. Since he'd been a teenager growing up in Haiti, he'd helped out at the orphanage next to his home. And on this trip, he'd brought back presents for the children. He was on his way to the orphanage when he came across a large group of people huddled around a trash can. He made his way into the front and, to his disbelief, found a 4-month-old baby inside the trash can. He said people were crowding around, heard them arguing about what to do with the baby and everything else. He scooped up the baby, took him home to his mother, where they washed, clothed, and fed him before taking him for medical help. The police launched an investigation, but they were never able to find the parents of the young boy, the 4-month-old boy. But with nowhere else to turn, a judge asked Jimmy if he would become the legal guardian of the baby. And he's like, I was already behind in my tuition. My family was struggled to make ends meet. I didn't have a dad growing up. But something was inside me just telling that I just had to take a leap of faith. And so Jimmy adopted this young boy at the age of 22. He's been splitting his time between the States and Haiti, where the boy is being cared for by his mother. And they now the boy is now 5 years old and just started in school. And it is just an amazing story of courage that this young 22-year-old man decided to take the leap, as it were, and do what he needed to do. And finally, the last one for good news today. When an Arizona woman lost all of her hair during a 3rd brain cancer battle, her shaggy maned son stepped up, shears in hand, to offer a solution. Growing out his golden, luscious locks over his past, all the way to shoulder length, he chopped it all off to provide a stylish hair piece for his mom. He said his mom didn't mind being sick, but she did mind looking sick. For 15 years, you'd never known that she had begun a cancer tumor in her pituitary gland. 2 successful surgeries in 2003 and 2006 couldn't get rid of the tumor permanently, and in 2017, she was prescribed radiation therapy. And so he soon came up with his plan in 2018. He just kept growing his hair out and out and out and out, and he chopped off 1 foot of his hair that he sent off to a company called Compassionate Creations in Newport Beach, California. It's a hairpiece company that made a new head of hair for his mom out of his own hair. And it is just, it's a lovely story. I mean, it really is. They got a picture of him and his mom standing next to her with her wearing his hair. I mean, it's man, that's the good news, man. That's the good news. That's what I wanted right there, the good news. All right. I guess we'll get back down into the politics, huh? Let's do that. We had some good news. We've girded our loins a little bit. Let's get back into the good news here later on. Meanwhile, Ben Vincent coming up, The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back with more right after this.
is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
That gave me a little tear in my eye. That was an amazing story. An amazing story of the good news. I like that a lot. That was a good one. That was a good one. All right. You guys ready to go? We're all geared up here. I believe that I now have Mr. Vincent on the line with us right now. Let's double check. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Michael. How's it going?
You know what? I was doing the good news, man. I got a little tear in my eye from all the good stuff that came out of that. I'm ready, but now I'm ready to knuckle down and do my thing here. Are you
right.
You all ready to talk about wood ticks, lunatics, and politics?
I am ready to go. It's all I've been thinking about the past 6 months.
I know it's a sickness, isn't it? It's horrible. Now
it really is. It gets to you.
Benjamin or Ben or both or either. Which do you prefer?
I like Ben.
You like Ben? Okay, all right.
Yep.
I'm a Michael, so I know that Mike, Michael, Mikey, whatever. I always want to give people the opportunity to let us know what's going on in their mind. All right, Ben. So hold on. You're on the line right now. We're in the commercial break. It's just you, me, and I don't know, 60 of our closest friends on Facebook and YouTube, hanging out, getting ready to go. So if you will hang out in my virtual green room, drinking my virtual coffee and eating my virtual donuts, we will be back to you here in just a moment. Okay.
All right.
All right. Ben Vincent, our guest here for the show. I'm going back up here, scrolling up to see what you guys had to say. I heard there was termination dust. Yep, a little bit cooler this morning. Although last night, boy, I was trying to sleep last night, and it was so miserably hot. It actually feels good this morning, that little bit of coolness. Trooper gives a ride to an 84-year-old lady with a walker as she was going to her hair appointment. She picked her up as she was walking on the interstate. My Lord, that's dedication. That's dedication. Catching a nut, good for Oregonians. Rural Oregonians are much like Alaskans. I lived in Oregon for 13 years, yeah. Dan Fagan executed himself from Facebook or excused himself. I don't know. What does that mean? He executed himself from Facebook. That was a comment from 12th Man in you. I don't think you meant the word executed because that just sounds bad. All right. Dumb parents shouldn't leave their guns laying around. We don't really know what the story is there, 12th Man. That's the worst part about it. I mean, we know it happened. We don't know what the full story is. There was no word on if the gun was properly stored or if there was, who knows. It's a tragedy. I debated as to even whether to talk about it, but it is like some of the biggest news in the state, so I put it out there, Let's see, 6 F-22s get to babysit Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, I saw that they moved a handful of F-22s from J-Bear to Poland yesterday. China threatened us that if Nancy Pelosi goes to Taiwan, there's something very drastic and severe will happen. I say those except... Okay. Sorry, Michael, I thought you were MD. Well, MD is fine. I mean, I wasn't. Look, you can call me you just don't call me late for supper. You can call me anything you want, just don't call me late for supper. I haven't missed too many of them, as you could tell. But I just try and be conscientious. Do you want to be called Kenneth or do you want to be called Kenny? Ken. I mean, I think that's polite. Can you invite the governor to your show for open line, please? Oh, sorry, Cindy. I didn't mean to laugh at you, but trust me, I've tried. He won't answer. He won't even answer questions in written form for you think he really wants to come on here and take questions from the listeners? No, I don't think that's going to happen. All right. We are 30 seconds out right now, getting ready to rejoin. Be sure to like and share this video. If you can do that on any of the platforms, you can like the video and you can share it with your friends. You can also like and follow the show page. And, of course, subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube and do all the YouTubey things. You ready to go? Let's get things ready to rock and roll. Ben Vincent, our guest, The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. All right, welcome back to the program. Thanks for continuing and coming back to us today. Deep dive into Southern Peninsula and Kodiak politics as we get a chance to talk to both of the candidates for House and Senate from those areas this morning. We are joined right now by Ben Vincent, Benjamin Vincent, GOP candidate for House District 5. You can find him over on the internet at Vincent4Alaska.com. That's Vincent, the number 4, Alaska.com, and he joins us this morning to give us his word on everything that's happening and get a little bit of a backstory here. Good morning, my friend. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing excellent. How about yourself?
You know, every day above ground's a good day. That's all I can say right now. It's all
That is
good.
very true.
I'm excited to talk to you guys. I used to live in Kodiak. I worked at I commercial fished out of Kodiak when I was younger and worked at the radio stations there as well. Ironically enough, but it's good to hear from somebody down there in the Emerald Isle. I want to get a little bit of background and figure out who you are, where you came from. And get some backstory. I know that you moved to Alaska when you were fairly young, but you seems like you got it in your blood. So give us a little bit about who you are, where you came from.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I moved back. Not back to Alaska. I moved to Alaska when I was 7 or 8 years old. After my parents finished up a 30-year career in the Marine Corps. After that, homeschooled with my family. Grew up in the Upper Anchorage and Kodiak areas. And then went to college at UAA, learned property management, business management, and moved back down to Kodiak pretty much immediately after that. I'd always wanted to live in a fishing community. I was since fishing in Seward when I was like 14, and the opportunity presented itself, and I couldn't say no, so I dropped everything and left down to Kodiak, and now we're here.
Yeah,
managing some properties, filling up a new Kodiak marketplace, which is being developed by the local Native Association here in town, CANA, and really making leaving my mark on the island here and in the district.
Well, Kodiak is a special place. I will say that I do have very fond memories of it, and it's good to see somebody else taking an interest in what's going on down there. Ben, you're pretty young. You're what, 24, 25 years old? And
I am 24, yep.
24, which it seems, kind of young, but at the same time, it's nice to have some fresh blood running in there, running for the State House. But, again, what was that trigger moment? I mean, what was there? Was there an aha moment? Was it the straw that broke the camel's back? Was there a single thing that triggered you into this madness of running for State House? What, walk me through the process here. What was the genesis of all this?
Yes, I'd say best way to describe it is the straw that broke the camel's back. A lot of stuff just kept piling up around politics, both nationwide and the local level. Like I was finishing up college when the COVID stuff got started, seeing what the assembly was doing there in the Anchorage area. And I made that decision that I wanted to be involved in my community at a governmental standpoint, because it is everybody's responsibility to help run the government. It's not just a select few people or a delegated small group of individuals that run it. It's a everybody type of thing. The next question is, when do I get started? Where do I get started? And how do I make that happen?
Right.
So I'd say I'm getting started at a pretty ambitious position here, state legislature.
Right.
I was thinking it was going to be probably something like assembly or something simple like that, but I prayed about it. I talked with some friends about it. When it was, I think it was back in February, somebody random, I had no idea who they were, had no connection to them whatsoever. They messaged me asking if I was running for State House, and that was a pretty clear indication of when and where to get started.
Well, and I think it is, it's I think some people will be offended, like, well, you haven't paid your dues, you haven't worked your way up from the local levels. But yet we've seen people who have done just that. David Nelson is young. Scott Kawasaki started out really young in the assembly. It can be done, and you can be effective. And so I think that it's you should be commended for wanting to give back to the community and do this. And I'm excited to hear the whole story here. I saw on your website, which folks, if you want to go out and find out more about Ben, Vincent4Alaska.com, Vincent4Alaska, you talk about depoliticizing Alaska. You want to depoliticize. So walk me through that. When you say depoliticize, what is the what offends you? What is the offensive part, and what do you want to see changed?
Well, it's like for the last 6 years, give or take, more or less, we've been talking in the legislature about the same key issues. We talk about the ferry system and argue about how much funding that's going to get, what schedules it's going to have. We talk about the PFD and debate back and forth of how much it's going to be when that shouldn't even be on the table in the first place. And so many other things like education, how much money's going back and forth. And it gives candidates a reason to run. It gives them a thing to run on. And it's the same problem over and over again that isn't being taken care of or fixed properly. It's just a continuous, ongoing issue that candidates can use for their benefit at election season.
Right.
And I want to take those programs and depoliticize them as much as possible. It's like for the ferry system, up here in Kodiak, we have Alaska Aerospace, which is the rocket launch complex on the island, and that is a state-owned corporation. We could take the ferry, turn it into a similar type of format to a state-owned corporation, or in this case, a nonprofit that the state funds and it runs as a business, nonprofit business. Then I think we would be able to, one, provide more quality and timely ferry services that are more consistent. And two, it takes it out of the legislature's debating pile because there's a lot of focus that goes into that topic, and that distracts our legislatures from talking about things that can matter to us, such as education policy, as opposed to just funding. Because let's be real, we spend a huge amount on education, over $17,500 per pupil, and our education is in the toilet. We are number 50 out of 51, only above New Mexico. And so it's not a money issue from what I've been able to find. It is a cultural issue about the type of education that we give our children, the curriculums that we use, and also just holding our kids accountable in the education system. There's a lot of classes out there. You keep answering the same question with different answers. It'll keep telling you you're wrong, and then only let you move forward once you get it right. That's not learning. That's getting lucky and memorizing for a test.
Right. That actually brings us over to a couple things. The budget. You mentioned the PFD. I'm assuming then you're for a statutory PFD for either following the law or changing the law. What's your position?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. The PFD. So what's happening right now is playing with the PFD as it's been happening. The PFD is the people's money first. It's the permanent fund dividend. It is dedicated to the people, and taking from the PFD is effectively implanting a tax on the people without asking for their consent. And it's treated like our legislature is able to use that pile of money for their needs, but not the needs or not the personal financial needs of the people. It's like 30% of the island, if not 30% of the district, is on housing vouchers. That tells you a lot already of the financial situations of our district and how much could another $1,000 per person in the household or another $2,000 really impact somebody's life like that, instead of the government using it for their own services, which we didn't need to do until 6 years ago when they started playing with it.
Right. Well, I found it interesting on your website. The verbiage that you put on your website is the permanent fund dividend is the sharing of profits from the land that all Alaskans own, which I think is that's a simple sentence, but it has a real grasp on what the permanent fund dividend is all about. And it seems like many of your potential colleagues feel like this is just free government money that we're giving out, not that it is Alaskans' fair share of the oil wealth.
Yeah, it is not free. It is our compensation. Without the PFD, it's like if you want to get rid of the PFD, then give us our compensation back. Give us our land rights, give us our mineral rights. But they don't want to do both. They just want to use the PFD for themselves and push the mineral rights issue to the side.
Well, and the fact that they're taking the PFD, as you said, is a de facto tax, and it disproportionately affects those in the lowest income brackets more than anybody else. I mean, somebody who's making a couple $100,000 a year is probably not going to miss $1,000, but somebody who's making $20,000 a year definitely going to feel that.
Yeah, and I do work in low income, so I'm working with individuals of all income levels, and $1,000 can go a long way. It can take you for a couple of months. It's a huge number to some people.
You mentioned education. Education, obviously, one of the biggest components of our budget. We have thrown ever-increasing amounts of money at education, yet we still rank in the bottom. I mean, the bottom of scholastic achievement here. And many people say that education is actually being overfunded, that we're not being efficient with the money. Have you taken a look at the budget? Have you seen ways that you can find efficiencies to save money in there? I mean, should we be opening up the funding formulas? Should we be looking at overhead? Should we be looking at consolidation of school districts? What in your mind is some ways that we should be looking at the budgets for education?
So I think one of the first things to address would be the overhead aspect, janitorial, cleaning, simple services like that can be outsourced to a third party. That way it benefits the community that it's in, and then it also benefits the school system as potentially being a more cost-effective option. I think as far as the budget goes, it's the number per pupil and our spending is going to be a bit inflated because we do have the native schools, and those are going to cost a bit more just naturally. So something that I would like to see us address first is the curriculum. It's like Massachusetts is the number one schools in the nation. So they obviously have a working system. Why can't we just replicate that? It's like if there's a working boat versus a sinking boat, which one are you going to hop on?
Right. Well, and I think if you look at it again and you look at the amount of administrative, the growth of the student base versus the growth of the administrative overhead, you'll see that there's a disproportionate amount of growth in the overhead. We have a larger amount of students, but proportionally the amount of overhead and administrative and all those costs have skyrocketed compared to the in-classroom costs. Do we need to look at that and reprioritize where those monies are going? And should we have 3 times the overhead that we used to have when we only have 1.5 times the students?
I think we definitely should, especially if it is on a continuous uptick, and whereas our students are not on a continuous uptick at this time. Because a lot of these services, they do need to be ran like a business. If you can't supplement or have the funds to properly run the schools or those each individual factors, then you need to take a hard look at what's going on instead of just adding to the budget. It's like that's a lot of what people talk about is some people that I've ran into, they would rather see their PFD gone as opposed to have a falling education. But I really don't think it is adding to the budget is going to fix it or help it. That's helping some other individuals, but it's not helping the students as we've clearly seen. And the students need to be on the list, not the overhead, not the individual line items that can benefit people other than the student.
We definitely need to get more for our money, more bang for the buck, so to speak, out of our education system. And it needs to be. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be addressed. Obviously, more money is not fixing the problem.
Exactly.
All right. We're coming up on the break. We're talking with Ben Vincent, GOP candidate for House District 5. We're going to continue our discussions with him here in just a moment, but we are up against the break, so we will take it, and we will come back here in just a second. We'll talk to him a little bit about the Charter of Changes, some of his other hot-button issues as he goes forward, what his constituents are saying now as he goes about and talks to the public. We'll continue in a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Benjamin Vincent, our guest, will return right after this.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
Okay, we're in the break right now. Benjamin Vincent is our guest. We'll answer a few questions from the chat room. Cindy said she was curious about the comment about why native schools are naturally going to cost more. I mean, I have an answer to that, but Ben, you said that naturally they're going to cost more. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so our public school system, it does have a required footprint that you need to build a school on, regardless of size. So the minimum size for a public school is 10 students. If you get 10 students together, state is required to fund the school and fund the student. So they need to build a footprint that is disproportionate to the number of individuals out there. And then on top of that, you have the administrative costs. And out in the villages, the cost of living is much higher. And therefore, you need to compensate at a higher rate. And that's just something that we as Alaskans need to appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and the whole school systems basically are based on a enterprise level. If you've got 1,000 students, you can obviously do more with the same facilities for 1,000 students, and the cost per student goes down compared to only having 10 students and requiring the same infrastructure. It's historically always been that way, that the smaller communities are a much higher per student expenditure. And in fact, in the villages, you're seeing some of these places where the cost per student is in the $40,000 to $50,000 range to run the schools versus a $10,000 range in the more urban communities. So naturally it is going to cost more than that. Now, those schools should have more access to federal and tribal dollars, Cindy, that is correct, but the state also is required by the Constitution and by previous judicial decisions to provide all that stuff. So that is one of the big things that's going on out there. Let's see what else is going on here. Stutes needs to be replaced. Well, I think that's what Ben is trying to do. He's trying to move forward and bring some new blood to there. Hunky Lee says, I like the PFD too. Don't you think it's redistribution of wealth, a communistic comment? Ben, what are your thoughts on the PFD as a redistribution of wealth?
It is anything. Well, there's an argument for that, I'm sure. But the 50 is our compensation for mineral rights. If we didn't have mineral rights, then it could be considered a redistribution. No. If we had our mineral rights, it could be considered a redistribution of tax dollars that come in from the oil.
Right.
But we gave up our mineral rights so that the oil could benefit from the natural resources that we have, which is abundant in this state.
Right.
So it's our compensation. It's not a redistribution.
Yeah, I mean, Jay Hammond said that the PFD was actually the ultimate expression of capitalism because we have given up one right, which, of course, is the mineral rights for the state, and we are receiving just compensation for that. It's not free money. It is actually earned money. Now, whether we earned the money simply by being residents and being corporate owners of the mineral wealth, or however you want to put it, maybe somebody says, well, you're not really working for it. Well, we've given up all of our mineral rights, and this is the just compensation for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I cannot imagine state subsidies I cannot imagine the state subsidies of $150,000 just to educate 3 kids in a family of 5 that lives in the middle of nowhere. Well, you may not be able to imagine it, Chris, but it happens. That's what happens when you build a $5 or $6 million school for 10 children and then have to maintain it and keep it running and put the teachers out there and house them and do all that kind of stuff. The costs escalate pretty quick in the long run. And on top of that, if you have to have a school district structure and everything else, it becomes a very, very expensive proposition. Let me see what else is in here. Any other questions for Ben? So I don't see any other questions. Ben, quickly then, what's the reaction been are you getting a lot of support from the Republican district? What kind of love are you feeling down there?
Yeah, so I'm walking the streets, talking to people, door knocking. I've been getting, if not just neutral, but a positive reaction to me running. For just the sake that I am a younger individual getting new people into the state legislature with new ideas. As far as the local districts, my district rep is Duncan Fields. He's out fishing right now, so I haven't had a chance to talk with him specifically about my candidacy or like that. But I have spoken with our regional representative, and they are in full support from the region level.
Good. All right. Well, good. Well, we'll keep going here in just a second. We're going to be continuing here. Benjamin Vincent, our guest, GOP candidate for House District 5. I see a question on backpack funding, which I think we're going to have to take a crack at here. Excuse me, in just a second. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like and share, like and follow. Let's do it. Here we go. All right, we're continuing now. Ben Vincent is our guest, GOP candidate for House District 5, which covers Kodiak, Cordova, and some of the lower parts of the peninsula here. He joins us this morning to discuss his candidacy. We were just talking about education, and before we get off the education topic, somebody in the chat room dropped this question, and I should have asked it. Thank you, Timothy, for throwing it out there. The question is, where do you stand as a candidate on backpack funding? Are you familiar with the phrase backpack funding, where the funding follows the student rather than going just to the brick and mortar district, Ben?
A bit, yeah. I consider that more like a student voucher program, and you get to have your school choice or go somewhere else, private schools. I think that is a good idea. I think that is something that we can definitely look into implementing for the state. It gives the schools a incentive to, one, do better, and then they receive more students and thus more funding. But if they're not doing well and they're unable to keep up with the schools around them, it's like a competition. If you can't perform on the open market, then you got to face the truth and know that maybe there's something else that you need to do. But I do think that's a good thing to try out for the state. I haven't seen it done anywhere else that I know of anyway. And I think it's a great new idea to promote our school systems to step up to the plate and give us a quality education.
There are several states now that are playing around with it, and I would encourage you, if you do get elected, that you take a look at the states and how they're doing it and see if it's something we can incorporate here. I think it would be fantastic to be able to give the parents freedom to be able to make some of those choices. Let's talk a little bit about some of your other issues. You mentioned the marine highway system. That has been quite the political football. Obviously, people who are down in the communities who are served by it are very passionate about it. And meanwhile, the rest of the state is asking questions about the efficacy of it, the cost, and does it make sense? What are your thoughts on the marine highway system? Is it being adequately funded? Are there efficiencies to be found? Give me your overall take on it.
Yeah, so I think the funding-wise, I think So far, it's been okay funded. There are, if everything was a perfect world, we'd have newer boats that weren't rusting out every couple of years that needed repairs constantly, which is why I'm really happy that our current governor has been able to help us get that brand new boat with the federal infrastructure funds. I think that's going to go a long way for our district and our parts of Alaska down here. As far as efficiencies, everything like that, like I said earlier, it ties back into that incorporating the Alaska Marine Highway System so that it runs and operates similar to a nonprofit business, but with a business sense instead of more of the political sense that has kind of become it. And the discussions in the legislature and allowing them to solve their issues the best way that they know how. They're obviously the experts, the ones who run the highway, work on the highway, whereas a lot of the politicians, they hear what they hear from representatives and lobbyists, and that could be the extent or most of their knowledge. And I think handing it off to the individuals who run it more so would be a great step in the right direction.
You mentioned also private partnerships, public-private partnerships, working with different private vendors, similar to what they do with the National Park Service, where you have private vendors on board the vessels providing a lot of the services that are currently being provided by the state at a much higher cost.
Yeah. So as far as things like food courts, the entertainment that are on the ferries, I think get them out of the states or the ferry's purview and sending it to a private vendor who would be subsidized if they're not making the profit, just to make sure that we hold them onto the ferry system. And then also just provide higher quality services than what we're able to provide with our limited funding for the ferries. I think would go a long way in making the ferry system a preferred form of travel. Because right now it's like you have two options to get off the island or many parts of the peninsula, like Cordova. You can fly out or you can take the ferry. And you can fly out for 45 minutes. You could take a day on the ferry, but if it's an experience, then I think people would be more prone to taking the ferry for the experience side of it, given that you have the time availability.
Well, part of the problem, of course, is the costs involved and the fact that the state is subsidizing, a significant chunk of every one of those trips coming out of there. How do you propose we find the efficiencies? I mean, when the state is paying for 30 or 40 or 50% of every trip through subsidies, how do you find those efficiencies to bring that cost down? I mean, the whole ferry system is almost as much as the rest of the entire DOT budget for the whole state, for all the roads. I mean, you could travel on a road for 15 cents a mile or something, and yet, it's into the dollars per mile for the ferry. So how do you find those efficiencies?
Yes, that's a really good question. As far as the efficiencies in the travel, I can't say I've been able to find a way that we could make them more efficient than they already are. As far as going back and forth, the fuel costs have been going up. The maintenance on the ferries has been going up just due to their age and the amount of use that we put them through. But we also need to look at it like it is a interstate highway system. It's similar to the Glen Highway, the Parks Highway. It's a required highway that citizens of these coastal communities need to use to get their cars back and forth, ship the goods back and forth. And without it, costs go up drastically to ship cars down here. It goes from like $400 on the ferry to at least $2,000 shipping through like Sampson or Span, Alaska.
Right.
And that is something that I know a lot of folks on the interior would like to see the cost go down. But as of right now, I'm not convinced that we'll be able to make the cost of travel go down by a significant amount on the state side.
It's a perennial issue, and I'm sure it's something we'll come back and revisit. One of the other things you mentioned on your website, which I haven't seen really on any other candidate's website thus far anyway, was a discussion on the binding caucus and the, how you actually have a picture of a puppeteer here next to the words binding caucus. Give us your thoughts on that and what's going on.
Yeah. So from what I've seen of the binding caucus, it effectively takes a large group of legislators who are elected by their constituents to represent them, and then it ties them into a club that represents the club for a large majority of votes, a large amount of the legislative duties, actions, and everything political that you could think of. If you're not in the caucus, you lose a lot of services that other legislators are able to benefit from. It's like you lose legislative aides, or you join the caucus, you could have more legislative aides to help you get stuff done. The only stipulation is you need to vote what we vote with.
Right.
And if they're voting on something that is not beneficial to your district, then you need to vote on it either way. Right. And I think that's just a poor practice for the state. There's only 2 states in the nation that allows for binding caucuses. It's us and I believe it's Montana, but I could be totally mistaken on that one. And both of them do have ranked choice voting, which again is a thing that I think we need to bring back to the people to get voted out and do the confusion. But ultimately, back to the binding caucus, it limits the legislature's ability to properly represent their constituents.
Right, selling your vote.
Commitment.
Yeah, selling your vote
exactly.
At the very beginning.
Yeah.
So you were no fan of the binding caucus, and you would not join a binding caucus then?
I would work at not joining a binding caucus. Yes, that would be one of my primary concerns of. All right. Primary things to not do.
I'm down to the last 90 seconds here, so Ben, I want to give you a chance to give us your elevator pitch. Why should we vote for Ben Vincent for State House? Hit me with it.
Yes. So obviously running, I want to take our Alaskan services and take the politics out of it. PFD, fair system, education, it's all a running token year after year. Our legislatures have been using it as a negotiation tool, and I want to put an end to that. Make it so that they can't negotiate the fair system if it's put into a separate corporation. PFD is established as a statutory PFD. You can't negotiate that or use it as a election token, and then make something actually happen with our education, because it's always a problem. It's always going to be a problem to run on, and I want to actually solve the issue and then get out. I don't want to be there forever. I just want to take care of Alaska so that my family has a future and your family has a future with mine.
Benjamin Vincent, Vincent4Alaska.com, the number 4, Vincent4Alaska.com. Ben, thanks for coming on board and joining us. We appreciate you being part of it today.
Thank you.
Hold the line for just a second, Ben. Folks, we got more coming up. Heath Smith up next, the Hour 2 of the Michael Duke Show. Be kind, love one another, live well. We'll see you on the other side. Final question here, Ben. I got just a couple minutes here. So do you think that we should enshrine, protecting the PFD, obviously as a statute, the legislature just practically ignores statutes at their whim. So do we need to enshrine the PFD formula in the Constitution? Do we need to put a spending cap into the Constitution? Those kind of things to get some control back?
Yes, I do. Right now, the legislature has gone rogue, and if I'm able to get in, that is one person out of 60 that need to get in to make the difference that we need to see. Enshrining it into the Constitution will ultimately give it back to the people, all the power to the people, which is where it needs to be in the first place.
And I kind of liked your response on the binding caucus, but you got a little squidgy there at the end. So you say you're going to work to not be in a binding caucus. Does that mean that you ultimately would join one if you had to? I mean, at some point, I think somebody has to take a stand. I don't know is that I would do that to my constituents to sell my vote at the beginning. I'm looking for something a little more solid here in your answer on that one. Can you tighten that up for me? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah. So I would not joining binding caucus. I would work to end the binding caucus and get it out of there. But I would not be joining a binding caucus that limits me on my ability to vote for my constituents.
Okay. Well, that's good. Binding caucus is actually unconstitutional and illegal in many states. And Mike Shower's research here the last couple of years has shown that there's not a single state that actually utilizes it except for Alaska. But in most places, it's illegal. and in some places, unconstitutional. So it makes sense. I know.
Yeah, which we need to do that here.
Yeah.
We need to
I would love to see, I would love to see it if we did get the con going and we do open up the Constitution. I would definitely like to see that go into the Constitution to where that is an illegal process, because it just offends me. I mean, from start to finish, that you step down there as a brand new legislator to represent your constituents, and they say, well, you can represent your constituents, you just got to vote the way we tell you to vote on certain things. Just offends me at my core at that point. Ben Vincent, our guest, GOP candidate for House District 5. Any final thoughts, Ben, here before I let you go?
Nothing that comes to mind. Another thing that I'm trying to focus on is helping out our housing situation in the district and in Alaska. Like this district, I mentioned it earlier, we have 30% of households on vouchers, and something needs to give. The cost of housing is way too high. You can buy a decent house for $600,000, or you can buy one that's that could be falling apart for $400,000, and those are your options.
Right.
And just really to promote for the private industry, the private sector to come in, build more housing, build apartments, and redevelop what we already have, I think would make a huge difference for the lives of my constituents, and allow them to more easily build a future for their families.
All right, Ben Vincent, Vincent4Alaska.com. Ben, thank you for coming on board. We appreciate you being part of it today, and we look forward to hearing more from you. All right, thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. All right, let's get our next caller on the line here as we get ready for the next segment with Heath Smith. Let's get him on the line, and we'll get things all ready to go here, and we'll do that.
Good morning.
Good morning, Heath. How are you?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
Good, sir. You about ready to go?
Yes, I'm plugged in and ready.
You're plugged in and ready. You got coffee. You get you're mainlining it, right? Tapping it right into the vein, ready to go this early morning.
Yep. Good to go.
Okay, well, it's just me, you, and 60 of our closest friends on Facebook and YouTube right now. We're in the commercial break. We're about to rejoin here in about 2.5 minutes, and we'll get things kicked off right at the top of the hour when we come back with you and be ready to discuss all the issues, okay?
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, hold the line there for me. Heath Smith is our guest. We're ready to talk with him about a variety of topics, and we'll see what he has to say about all the different issues that are hot and running around the state of Alaska. Folks, if you haven't yet, please like and share this video. Please like and follow the show page on Facebook. You can also subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube. Do all the YouTube things out there for me, if you would. It'd be great. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're currently at 321. So we got a ways to go. I got 3,500 followers on Facebook, and I can't get 1,000 of them over onto YouTube to click the little subscribe button. We'll do it. We'll work it. We'll get it. Come on over. Join us over there. It'll be a fun time. We'll be talking here in just a minute with Heath Smith, and we'll see what has to say. IV coffee, I like that, said Sandy. Hey, sometimes you got to mainline that stuff. Sometimes you just got to pop a vein and just put it right in there to get you woken up. That's what has to happen, Sandy. I'm with you on that. Kevin says binding caucus is a byproduct of lazy leadership. Couldn't agree more. Hunky said, I think the PFD should stay in statute level, not Constitution. Constitution is about unchanging principles. Statute is easier to change, and the PFD is something that needs to be adjusted often. Except you're wrong, Hunky, because the PFD hasn't needed to change in 40 years. It was only the government, it was only the governor and the legislature that decided that they needed to take that money and use it for something else. That's what changed. It had nothing to do with whether or not the statute or the formula was wrong. It had everything to do with the fact that the government and the legislators wanted more money. So it should be something that's unchanging. That's what should happen. All right, we got to go. Here we go. Jumping back into it. Hour 2 of the Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Yep, across the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com, where you'll find the audio-only stream, the podcast, all the social media links, all the frequencies that we're on, and, of course, across the state of Alaska on those frequencies on your favorite radio station and FM translator. Welcome to the Michael Dukes Show. It is our Thursday edition of the show, and we are continuing right now. We're kind of down in the peninsula, talking with some potential legislators down there. We just finished up with Ben Vincent, who's running for State House for District 5, which is Kodiak, Cordova, a little bit of Seward, that kind of area. And now we are getting to the larger stake, which is the Senate seat. We're about to talk with GOP candidate for Senate in District C, Heath Smith. District C covers the whole lower peninsula, Kodiak, and the southern part, Homer area. Currently being held by Gary Stevens. Heath Smith, though, joins us right now to discuss that and his candidacy, and we welcome him to the program. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Excellent. It's great to be with you, Michael.
Thank you for coming on board and joining us here this morning. Heath, for those of you that don't know you, I know that you're from Homer. You're down there. You got your family and everybody else. Give us a little bit of history of who you are, where you came from, and then we'll jump into some of the issues, okay?
You bet. Yeah, well, my mother's folks moved to Alaska in the late 40s, and my father's parents came up in the 50s prior to statehood. So, we've got some pretty deep roots here, and there's something been about Alaska for me that I truly love. I mean, growing up here, I couldn't wait to get out, but it didn't take me long to decide that I had to come back, and I've never looked back since then. So I have a tremendous amount of how would you say it, appreciation for what it takes to make it here in the state.
Right.
I've worked multiple jobs over the years to support my family, and fortunately, in the 25 I've been with UPS, that's been kind of a grounding job that's allowed me to kind of be home every night, and my wife to be able to stay home for many of those years with the small kids. And so I've been appreciative of having, good work.
Right.
Which is not always the case for everybody.
Right. No, it's tough. And that's definitely a job that I think would put you in touch with the people. You know what I mean? You're out there doing it day in and day out, right?
Absolutely. So, and that's one of the things. I mean, it dawned on me one day. I was like, man, if I've been able to deliver to these doors consistently and dependably for this long, maybe I can deliver in Juneau for all these people too. And that's really what I intend to do.
We'll just call him our little brown Santa. That's what he is. He's here to help us out and get things done. Heath, you've got some history there. You're not jumping into this raw. You have been serving on the Homer City Council in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, I was elected to 2 terms there, so I had 6 years on the municipal level, and that's really kind of how I got started. I've been kind of a passive observer of politics, because in college I got a degree in a field in political science. So it's always been something that has interested me. But, what kind of pushed me over the edge, and I know you like to ask this, is that, Homer had been going through this process to build a public safety campus that was going to, look at like over a $30 million price tag. And I was like, wow, that sounds a little steep for a little town like Homer. And then I started going back and reading the minutes of this little committee's work. And it dawned on me that if somebody didn't kind of get in the middle of that, then we would be looking at a $30 million price tag that just was unreasonable.
Right.
And so I just, I went from there to the computer, filled out my filing form, went down to City Hall, and the insanity began.
Right, exactly. So that was your aha moment when you looked at the fact that they wanted to build a $30 million police station, and you were like, wait a second, for a community this size, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, their hope in the beginning was a police and fire station, and ultimately we built a police station for $7.5 million, which we only had to bond for $5 million, and so that to me was a great success.
Well, and look, we all want public safety and infrastructure, but it also has to make fiscal and financial sense to be able to do that. I mean, I've seen I served on the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly, and I saw a lot of wish lists go out there for a lot of different things. And it's easy to say, well, it's only $30 million and it's somebody else's money, no big deal. But when you realize that it's the constituents that are bonding and paying for it and putting their property up on the docket for it, it starts to make a lot more sense. So I applaud you for that. What was the impetus to jump from, being a former city council person to all of a sudden, I guess I'm going to go to the big show, the state? What was the impetus to make that move?
Well, ultimately, I mean, each municipality and community are going to have their priorities, and we have to work through the legislature in order to successfully kind of partner in achieving some of those. And, when it came down to the police station, the state didn't have any money. I mean, we're a regional jail down there, and yet the state couldn't pony up, a red cent for that. And, that didn't make me very happy. But on the other hand, I think that my interactions with our current senator led me to believe that we could not depend on him to deliver for the district. And I just feel like that is a failure in respect to what we owe our constituents.
Right.
So, our priorities continue to be the same in Homer as they have been for some time. And I think that we need people in the legislature that are going to be willing to kind of be there on our behalf and help us deliver on that.
Well, you kind of bring up an interesting point now. For Homer is kind of my adopted hometown. I love the place. I take a special interest in what's going on down there, and I have a lot of friends down there now that I've developed over the last few years. And one of the things that I constantly hear from people down there is that their representative in the Senate has been, they really haven't seen him in a few, like they'll see him during election season, and then that'll be the last that they see of him for the rest of the time. And they're a little butthurt about that. Is that been your experience? Is this one of the reasons why you're running, to actually represent the people in the area, or give me your thoughts?
Well, yes. And to be quite clear, I mean, this is not an indictment of Gary himself. He's a super nice person. But ultimately, this isn't a competition of who's the nicest guy. It's about who's going to be willing to do the work. I mean, I've been on the road now for 3 weeks straight. I was in Cordova 2 weeks ago for the better part of a week, and then I was in Kodiak last week, and I'm in Seward as we speak right now, and I've been knocking doors. And the reaction of the people are like, wow, you got my vote. You're actually at my door. You're the first person that's come to my door. And for all the good things that have happened over the course of the last 22 years, there are things that haven't happened. And I think that we need to be able to answer those questions and resolve those concerns. And I don't see a pattern of behavior that is currently happening with our current senator that is leading the body to get that done. And it's time to get results.
Let's talk about some of your priorities as a state senator. If you were Senator Heath Smith today, what would be the priorities that you would be looking at going into this next session? What would you be focusing on?
Well, I mean, primarily, I think that we have to resolve the permanent fund dividend issue, because that seems to be the tripping block that consumes far too much attention every single year.
Right.
If we can resolve that component, then everything else that we can focus on is going to be meaningful. It just frustrates me. And this really comes down to the same thing that got me into city politics, is that I have a frustration level that we've been unable to address this in a way that can really engender trust in the process and in the people that are there to carry it out. And so I'm just ready to go to work. And I know that it's going to take a team to do it. This is not anything that any single senator or House of Representative can achieve on their own. We're going to have the political will. So there's going to be some team building there, and the ability to kind of collaborate on what we envision the future of Alaska to look like. And part of my frustration is that the more studying I've done, I mean, you go back to, and this would be right in your alley, is, back in 1980, they had this awareness project for the state spending policy.
Right.
And it was put on by Common Sense of Alaska. But the title of it was The Challenge of Plenty. And to me, kind of, well, all the things that we're discussing today were discussed in 1980 when we started experiencing those big budget surpluses. It's like, okay, what is the challenge that this plenty of money really offers and presents to us? And here we are, 42 years later, in that slow butter churn, having gone really nowhere.
Right.
And I mean, one of the primary concerns was that, okay, we have all this money. Will we be able to curb the growth of government, knowing that these revenues are going to decline over time?
Right.
And I mean, I think clearly it's proven out that, we built a government that was not sustainable on the economy that we have. And so it's problematic that we don't have a private sector that is robust enough.
Right.
To support a stable government.
Well, that was almost a blueprint. It wasn't a warning. It ended up being a blueprint for what not to do, but they actually followed it. I mean, when we received that first royalty payment, the state budget was $164 million. That was the entire state budget. And if you extrapolate for inflation and everything else, our current state budget, if we're basing it on the same thing, should be around $2.5 billion. Instead, we're spending $6 billion on state government. And at some point you got to go, something got way out of control there. Something really fell apart. And I agree with you. I think the PFD is the single item that is sucking up all of the oxygen in the room. The current legislature is showing a complete and utter disdain for the law. #follow the damn law. And if they decide that they don't want to follow it, then they should at least have the intestinal fortitude to change it. What do you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, this is the single most publicly watched piece of legislation that is on the books. And so for our lawmakers to publicly ignore it, in a sense, it doesn't look good. And I think over time it erodes trust in what they're doing. So I really think that, if it is broken, then it should be fixed so that our lawmakers are following the law.
Well, they've created their own conundrum here. I mean, they have intentionally broken. When they passed SB 26 to make the POMV formula, they intentionally put two statutes at odds with each other. And if you look at them and realize that, well, one statute accounts for the vagaries of the market, and deals with everything. That's the statutory formula. The other one doesn't. It creates basically an ever a quasi-endless supply of money for government growth. That's the POMV. You realize that this was almost intentional. They put it at odds so that it would become the crisis and focal point for moving forward, which leads me to my final question for this segment, which is, SB 26, the POMV formula. If that statute was rolled back and repealed, then there would be only one statute to follow, and that would be the statutory PFD formula, which, again, accounts for the markets going up and down, the bulls and the bears and everything else. It's worked for 40 years. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think SB 26 is one of the prime culprits of causing this confusion. Would you support a repeal of it?
Well, yes, and partly because I don't think that the 5% POMV is something that's even sustainable under its current construction. So what I'll support is doing what makes the most sense for sustainable Alaska over time. And I know that the sausage making that comes through that is going to be it's going to be a robust discussion. But the reality of it is that we've gone nowhere, and it's only gotten worse in some respects, and that has to be resolved. The people deserve better, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the people do deserve better. And again, taking this statute off the books would go a long way towards fixing the issue that we're constantly. Well, although I feel that there are people in the legislature, I think, including your own opponent, who don't necessarily want to have that issue fixed because it gives them the political cover to do what they want. And again, never letting a crisis go to waste, so to speak, being able to do those things. And I think that's part and parcel of it. Heath Smith, our guest, candidate for Senate District C. You can find him at smithaksenate.com, smithaksenate.com, if you want to take a look at his bona fides and all the positions and everything. We're going to get into that here in just a moment as we continue with Heath Smith, the Michael Duke Show. It's common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. It's what we do every day right here from 6 to 8 a.m. Don't forget, you can always come out and join us on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch if you want to join into the conversation in the chat. We've got about 60, 70 people hanging out with us there. Feel free to come on out and be part of it with us. The Michael Duke Show continues with more Heath Smith right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break with Heath Smith right now. We got about 4.5 minutes or so before we have to go back and rejoin the radio. We'll take any calls or questions here out of the chat room here real quick to see if there's anything that Heath can answer. There's probably going to be some things that I need to answer as well. Timothy says, we need as many impediments to government as possible. The more, the better. Government should be small and inoffensive. Heath, your take on that?
Well, I think obviously that, as we spoke about with the challenge of plenty, that they expanded government to the point to where it's an unruly beast on some levels, and I think that small government is the best rule when it comes to the best way that the people can be served is through smaller government, and it really kind of puts the responsibility on the people to make it happen.
I agree. I mean, I think that's, again, going back to that first big royalty check of almost $1 billion, and the state budget was $164 million. Hammond made comments about, going through that money, giving drunken sailors a bad name that they went through that money so fast. And that was actually the genesis of the the permanent fund itself, and then the PFD later on, was because he saw, again, the curse. What was it called? The curse of the plenty, or the dilemma of the plenty. that you were
challenge of plenty.
The challenge of plenty. I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was the challenge of plenty. We had all this money, and it was just way too tempting for people who got into the legislature. I'm sure with the best of intentions, but you get a bunch of do-gooders in there with basically a blank check, and they created something that can no longer be sustained. And see, now that's the problem with government, is that it creates dependencies and then justifies what it's doing in the future because of those dependencies. Oh, we created this program. Now people are dependent on it. We can't possibly cut it. And I think that's a problem. Government trying to be too many things to too many people.
Well, and I share that. I mean, I've said this from the city council table. We cannot be all things to all people.
Right.
There is an endless list of good things that can be done for people. But the question is whether there are things that government needs to be involved in. And
right.
And there's a cost. There's a cost. There's even a social cost to everything that the government does. And I think we have to empower, not enable. And I think that is the difference between those types of programs that
right.
are important, don't.
Well, it's things that we can do versus are they things that we should do, right? I mean, what is the state mandated to do? They're, public safety, education, infrastructure. Okay, if it could fall under any of those things, then that's a good idea. But anything beyond that, under the general welfare clause or whatever, I mean, it just becomes a point to where we are trying to do too many things and should allow people to basically solve their own problem instead of having Uncle Sugar Daddy step in all the time.
Yeah. Yep. And the case, when the legislature was entertaining enacting an income tax, I was in Juneau on behalf of the city, and I went into our representative's office. I said, "Look, I mean, if you want to tell the people that you need them to take money out of their pocket to help run the services of the state, then there needs to be some assurance that you're going to not spend it in a way that's going to make them unhappy."
Right.
And because you've had all this house money that you've worked with from the oil industry, and here we are in this meltdown. And
right.
So what have you done that makes me want to trust you with my money out of my pocket?
Right.
And
based on your track record of what you've done with everybody else's money.
Well, right. What makes me feel good about taking money out of my bank and giving it to the state? And,
right.
And that legislator looked at me and says, "Well, Heath, I don't know what that looks like. I need you to tell me what that looks like." I'm just like, well, then maybe it's time to get somebody else in there, because I just don't. And that was several years ago, and that was in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, no, it's definitely frustrating. Heath, hold the line. We're going to jump back into it here. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like and share the show. Like and follow. Subscribe. Ring the bell. Let's do it. All right, we're continuing now with Heath Smith, who is a GOP candidate for state senate in District C, the new District C, down on the Kodiak and the Lower Peninsula. You could find him at smithaksenate.com. That's the website, smithaksenate.com. We continue now on some of the hot button issues. We've kind of covered the PFD. I guess to finalize that, Heath, based on what you've said and our discussion here, I would assume that you would be in favor of paying the statutory PFD first of all, and then enshrining it in the Constitution for protection. Would both of those be good things for you?
Well, I think to constitutionalize it is going to have to be done. I mean, I in looking at the Fiscal Policy Working Group's conclusions, I think that it's the only way to ensure that the legislature does not continue to revisit it and tinker with it. So I think that is probably going to be a necessity. I am for paying the statutory dividend because it's in statute. So if it needs to change, then we need to change it. But I cannot. As a legislator, I want to follow the law. I don't want to evade it. I don't want to, operate behind a curtain thinking that we're going to get cute with it. I think that it's our mandate to make law and then follow law.
Which leads us over to the questions of budgets, and I want to get to your different issues and positions, but let's go over the budget first. I mean, so state government, I've laid out a lot of things here with you here in the last 20 minutes or so, but so, give me your thoughts on the state budget. Is it too big? Is it too small? Is it just right? What is Heath Smith's position on the current budget? And let's start there.
Well, I think part of the reason that the budget is as big as it is this year is because of the capital aspect of it, right? The capital projects.
Sure.
And, over the course of the last 6 years, there hasn't been much. So it's been slim pickings. So I understand that they were trying to kind of do a corrective course.
Right. But even subtracting the $1 billion+ out of the capital budget, we're still sitting at over $5 billion in state spending on everything else. So, I mean, what's your take?
Well, it's too big. I mean, obviously. I mean, this goes right back to what we were talking about, the challenge of plenty, and what we started in 1980 and where we are today, is that we have built government beyond the means of the public in any way to support. And so if we're going to depend on oil revenues in the permanent fund, what they've effectively done is ignored the private sector over the course of time. Right. So there's nothing in place. There's not, the only thing they have in place right now is to say, oh, well, we just need to collect some income tax. They've largely ignored helping develop the private sector in a way that can have beneficial effects overall on helping have a stable government over time. So I think that the budget is clearly too big. It's not something that's sustainable, and that is clear. Right. I don't think anyone. Have you talked to anyone that said that the budget wasn't too big?
Oh, I've talked to a few people that said, I think it's okay. Of course, when you drill down into specifics, they don't have any real, I mean, when you start talking about cost per capita and cost per student and some of those things, they go, what? Because they just don't know. They're fat, dumb, and happy on what the state has been doing. And since it doesn't affect them directly, it doesn't come out of their pocketbook. They're not issued a tax bill every year to see what the actual cost of the government is. Then they are disconnected. I mean, that's one of the problems. I'm not a fan of taxes, but one thing that would be sure is that if everybody was issued a tax bill for the cost of the state every year, there would be a revolution in this state, because all of a sudden they would realize, well, I mean, my thought experiment was always, what they should do is they should just pass all the oil revenue proceeds, instead of putting it into the state budget or putting it into the permanent fund, they should just give everybody a check and split it up equally, and everybody would get a check for $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 that year, and then you issue a tax bill for $15,000 or $16,000 for every person, and there would be a riot. Because they'd be like, what do you mean it costs I don't use $15,000 a year in services. Well, that's just how government works. And I think if they understood that, there would be a change.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, in essence, that's what the PFD is, right? I mean, there is some connectivity that is created through the PFD and government. And this is why the last 7 years has been as tough as it is, because people are actually paying attention, because they've been toying with the PFD. Right. Because what they've taken out of the PFD is effectively a flat tax. Right. So that is what it is. And so people recognize that, and they're not real happy with the way the process played out.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. Obviously, some of the biggest aspects of this are covered by some of your positions. I mean, education is the second largest item in our budget right now, yet we continually score at the bottom of the barrel, like 48th, 49th, 50th in all the scholastic achievement and aptitudes. We've got a 75, 76% graduation rate, meaning 1 in 4 students just flunk out. And yet we spend, $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 per student, depending on average, depending on where you're going. And it's a hot mess. Is more money the issue there, or is this? Should we be looking at, should we be completely refiguring our education budget?
Well, money clearly is not solving the problem. I have good friends that have been educators, and they retired with really good benefits and pensions, and they think that we're not compensating our teachers well enough. That program has kind of waned, and our failure is a byproduct of that. I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that our teachers should be fairly compensated, and if we're falling behind in that respect, then that should be something that's revisited. But ultimately, just throwing more money into it is not going to be the saving grace here.
Right.
Institutionally, we have to see what the barriers to success have been and why. And the kids, I've got 6 kids. I mean, I've put all of them through, they have all, and they're still going through the public school system. And while I'm not completely happy with some of the results that have come from that, it's a big thing to tackle. I mean, they're getting ready to build a $13 million school at Ketch Silo, which is the end of East End Road, and then down the switch back and out into the flats for a Russian village out there. And they deserve a school, and they've had one. But they're going to build a $13 million facility for 42 kids. And the amount of money that adds to the books for the borough and ultimately is shared by the state is going to be something that is monumentally more than it costs to maintain the building and operate it that sits there today.
Right.
And so, for every dollar we spend, it takes $18 over the course of time to maintain whatever we spend that money on.
Right.
Well, and to multiply that out, it's a tremendous amount of money.
Right. Well, and we talk about efficiencies. I mean, we got 50 plus different school districts in the state, 53 or 54 different school districts, all with duplicative structures in the administration and the overhead. We've looked at what's happened with administrative size versus student size over the last 25 years, and we've seen that it has exploded. Student increase by 1.5 times, and yet administrative is tripled, and things like that. I mean, could we be finding efficiencies in pooling things, in consolidating school districts, in opening up the base student allocation formula instead of having it automatically increase, instead having discussions on it every year? I mean, could those things be done?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we need to explore all avenues at this point because, when you look at education component of our budget takes up, and then the health side. I mean, we have to look at finding the efficiencies that are there to be found. Right. And if we're not interested in looking, then we're never going to find it. And I know that there's going to be some resistance because you're talking about people losing jobs, and so there's going to be some pushback from these school districts and the unions in order to preserve a construct that has ultimately failed us.
And I couldn't agree more with that. Heath Smith is our guest. We are coming up on the break. I'm going to ask you if you want to hold on here through the next break, and because I do want to get to these positions and talk about a few more things before I let you go. So if you're willing to stick with me for just a couple more minutes, we'll do that real quick, Heath.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So Heath Smith is our guest, GOP candidate for State Senate in District C. You could find him on the web at smithaksenate.com. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the issues that he has got positions on from his website, and we'll talk about kind of a summation. We may touch on the Charter of Changes, and then we'll finish up. Heath Smith, our guest, The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break right now, getting ready to come back for one final segment here with Heath Smith. There's a lot of stuff to unpack here, Heath. This is one of the reasons why I do long form instead of just little 10-minute interviews, because I feel like we really need to get down into the weeds on some of this stuff. And I'm not a huge fan of the 10-minute soundbite because I want to ask some of the deeper questions and draw out more than what we're seeing in a 148 character tweet or whatever. And I appreciate you sounding off on some of these things. Let me go back to the chat room here and see what some of the folks are saying here. Pay the full PFD, then issue a tax bill requiring one half to be returned to the state within 30 days. That will fix the problem quickly, said Brian. I mean, that was exactly my point, right, Heath, of pay everybody the money directly and then issue them a tax bill, and it would be eye-opening what would happen in this state.
Oh, I think it'll get everybody's attention very quickly.
Yeah. Let's see. The problem is the curriculum topics choices. Math, read by Mathematical Mindsets by Joe Boiler. Students learn math differently. You must teach math the way individual students understand it. I mean, this is, to me, one of the major problems with public brick-and-mortar schools is that it's a cookie-cutter assembly line kind of thing. Not all students learn. I mean, I have 5 children. We homeschooled them all, and each child had a different learning style. We had to create custom curriculums for each student, each one of my kids, because each one learned a little differently. One of them could do everything on his own. He could get his schoolwork done in 2 or 3 hours a day. He was motivated to do it. And others were foot draggers. They needed constant supervision. They needed constant help and explanation. They had to use completely different styles of learning for mathematics or other things. Some are visual learners, some are auditory learners. And each thing, I mean, that's the problem with a cookie-cutter type system. One size does not fit all in the education system.
Well, that's why parents really need to have a choice on where their kids get their education, and I really support, parent choice when it comes to that.
That's definitely something we like to see. Are you familiar with the backpack education system, the backpack education concept?
Well, not every component of it, but the concept of it, yes.
Yeah. I think that is ultimately kind of where we're going to be going, not just as a state, but as of a nation. I mean, one of the silver linings of COVID was that people discovered that, A, their school systems were not the end-all, be-all of the world, and B, they discovered that homeschooling and educating your own children was not as difficult as they were led to believe, either by the media or the education system or their friends and family or whatever. They discovered that it was a lot easier, especially with technology, than it was in the past. And I think this gives them a good opportunity. It gives us a good opportunity here to break the mold.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, finding excellent teachers and then being able to have that teacher teach in classrooms through technology with the assistance of aides in 20 communities. I think that there's some great possibilities that we can take advantage of in improving the system and outcomes.
Heath Smith is our guest, GOP state candidate for Senate District C. Let me see what I can come back with here. $2.8 million is the cost for a $14 million school just to redesign the wheel and build a new blueprint. Somebody else actually did the math for what Heath had talked about earlier. $13 million. He's talking about that new school down at the end of East End Road. $13 million divided by 42 students is $309,000 per student just for the building. That's just for the construction. That has nothing to do with the upkeep, the maintenance, the labor. What's the argument, Heath, for the other building? Is the other building just too old, or what's the problem?
Well, it was a lease situation. So the community had a building that they leased to the borough, but the building just fell apart. And so, to me, this comes down to the lease agreement, and that there should have been a built-in component that required maintenance over time so that it could be maintained, for a reasonable lifetime that a building should be. We had people come in and testify and said, we have some of the best outcomes coming from this school and they deserve a new building. And I was like, well, but if we're getting the best outcomes out of that situation, then what's to say that a new building at this additional cost is going to maintain or create the same outcomes.
Right.
So
right.
I think that the idea that we need more to do better is just a broken concept.
Right.
I think that we just need the right people dedicated to a process that has worked in the past, but somehow has gotten off the rails.
Well, and I think as a municipal, as a council member, you probably saw the same thing that I did, which is where they build these new buildings, and in no place would they have a plan baked in or a fiscal note baked in for the long-term maintenance and upkeep of those buildings, and that always drove me crazy because you got to understand, if you haven't been upkeeping the previous buildings, what's to say you're going to upkeep that? We're going to get back into this because this is a hot button for me. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Here we go. Okay, we're going to sidebar for just a second because we just talked about something right before we came back from the break that it just is what's a hot button for me. It's something that I saw when I served on the assembly up in the interior. I'm sure it's probably something that Heath saw when he was on the council in Homer. We were just talking about this new school district or this new school building, $13 million. They were leasing a previous building, but they didn't maintain the building. Therefore, it fell apart. And one of the things that always irritates me, especially when we keep hearing about, well, we need to build new this, we need to build new that, we've got the money, we should do this, blah, 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 blah. One of the things that we never saw, and I had to fight for almost every time in the past, Heath, was one, a plan to maintain and upkeep those buildings, and two, a fiscal note on what the ultimate long-term cost was going to be. You mentioned the $1 and $18 cost in the long run, but I mean, it's one of the fundamental flaws in government is that we keep not looking at the long-term cost of things. Oh, it only costs $13 million to build. What's the ultimate outcome 20 years down the road? What's it going to cost to maintain? And if you haven't been maintaining the building that you're using right now, where are the guarantees that you will maintain what you have in the future?
Absolutely. And this is what I asked our assemblyman when he came in and said, well, because that school, they brought to a ballot for a bond and it failed at $15 million.
Right.
And that was several years ago. Now they've come back and said, okay, we're not asking the people. We got $10 million from the state. The borough's going to put up $3 million, and we don't even have to ask anybody. And so in the hallway, I went up to the assembly member. I said, okay, now you've gone around the people here, but what are the additional costs now to run a facility like that? And what are the implications on the budget? And he just looked at me with glazed over eyes.
Had no idea.
And,
no idea.
And so
yeah.
there's all these associated costs that come with these types of projects that people just happily ignore because they look at the free money aspect and the overall good that they're convinced it will do, but there's no component built in to take care of what you said, and that's the maintenance over time.
Right.
And the cost of operating.
Well, and there's a lot of pressures going on. There's a huge lobby for the construction industry to always build new schools and do things like that. And yes, many times it's cheaper to build new than it is to try and retrofit or fix. But the problem is that the track record has shown that they will not update or maintain. It's the deferred maintenance hellhole where everything just kind of goes into a circle and nobody bothers to fix anything. It's just throwing good money after bad at that point. Anyway, I don't want to take up the whole time with that. I apologize. It's a personal peeve of mine. But let's talk about some of the issues that are unique to your district. Obviously, fisheries, the Alaska Marine Highway. These are big things for your areas. Give us your thoughts on those two topics, and we'll move along.
Well, again, I mean, the politicization of our fisheries and even the ferries is something that really are hindrances to, those being run right. So I really feel like the Board of Fish and the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, we have to make sure that people getting on there that are going to base their decisions on good science and will allow that to dictate kind of the management style rather than any special interests. And as far as the ferry goes, coastal Alaska has a highway system, and it happens to be run by ferries. And I understand that the cost is extreme, but I mean, this is how they stay connected. and it's how they get their goods at a reasonable price, how they move things. And I think that over time that due to some cuts and some pressures that we've allowed it to kind of denigrate. And so, people, I think they deserve, and I've been to Cordova and Seward, and Seward doesn't get ferry service right now, but Kodiak, Soldovia, which is part of the district, they just want something that's dependable and reasonably run. And I think that they don't need it 3 times a week, 2 times a week. I mean, Soldovia is like, look, if we just get this once a week, at least we know that we can get our vehicles, we can get our goods, we can get these things here.
Right.
You look at the road system. I mean, our road system is highly subsidized. And,
sure.
And so, you look at subsidies in relationship to that, but then you start to parse it out over the population that use one versus the other. And yeah, it pops your eyes a little bit. But I think that we owe connectivity to the people of Alaska. And so I'm a staunch supporter of the ferry system. And if we can find ways to do it better, then we should. But I think we need to do better at marketing it. When they peeled out the services side on board, I think that was a detriment to it. So I'd just like to see us revisit how we can market it better. I think that through the tourist season, it would be more utilized through that. If we do a better job at managing it.
Well, I mean, I think that the mismanagement, has been a big issue. I think you've got collective bargaining that's played a huge role in it. The personnel costs on those things are astronomical. The fact that it has to be subsidized at such a high rate, and maybe some of that should be spread out to the communities that are using it more. I mean, I don't see a subsidy for people who are having stuff flown out to Bethel or Fort Yukon or Anaktuvik. I don't see a subsidy going out to those people to fly things in or freight in or do that kind of stuff, or barging into their communities. I'm not saying that we should eliminate the highway system, the marine highway system. I think that it should just the burden should be shared a little bit more. And I agree with you. I think if you've got a community that's fine with once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, 2 times a week, whatever makes sense, but we should not be running boats with 8 passengers on it that burns 300 gallons of fuel an hour out there if that's all it is. We need to do a little more consolidation. We need to find ways. And again, not eliminating it, but I mean, hey, look, if there was a toll on the Glen Highway and I had to go in every day and pay $3 a day for a toll on the Glen Highway, I would do it because that's the cost of doing it. You know what I mean? If I have to be there, I have to be there. So I think there should be a little bit more equitable sharing in that, and it shouldn't be a hole in the water that you keep throwing money into, unfortunately. But it is a hot button issue for sure. Absolutely a hot button issue. I know we've talked a bit about education as well. Public safety and seniors are 2 of the other topics that you have on your site. Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I think clearly our senior population is especially growing on the Southern Peninsula, and it's projected to grow even more over time. It's a great place and destination for people to go to retire, and so housing is a huge issue. And I mean, housing is an issue, period, within the district, if not the state. And I would love to see some kind of housing initiative in the state, because I mean, housing is a fundamental, basic necessity in life. And these seniors, I mean, they deserve to have an ability to kind of move and graduate through what should be available to them.
You're talking about you're talking about like pioneer home kind of systems or things like that,
right? So assisted living, independent living, those types of things that that need to be available as we age. So I think that in talking to Nona Safra, she serves on a commission in the state, and she I think between even veteran housing. Housing is an issue. I mean, I've got 6 kids. They're all working this summer. A couple of my adult kids have full-time jobs, but you know where they're living? They're living at home, and it's because they can't afford to get out there and try and find a place. I mean, the prices of housing, and then couple that with the idea that people can use their houses as these Airbnbs. they're not available for rent for the summers. And so it's created this crisis that really needs to be addressed on some level so that people can have a fundamental basic need met. And so I feel like that's one of the components that needs to be addressed.
Public safety quickly here, public safety.
Well, I mean, we've seen this dialed back, and I mean, you know, obviously we can go back to SB 91, and that was an absolute disaster. But you know, when it comes to having enough people on the road system in order to meet the needs of keeping the law, I think we need to properly make sure that we have enough people in place to do that. You know, when you're in rural Alaska and you make a phone call and the closest trooper is 300 miles away, it makes you stop and wonder on what we're doing. So the CVSOs are important, and obviously that program has to be structured in a way that really serves the needs of those communities, because there's been some holes in the program in the past. But so I want to make sure that we have a robust enough public safety sector that provides for the needs of our communities.
We talked a little bit, and one of the most prime, I have something called the Charter of Changes, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's 4 changes that I think need to be made in the state to you know, give us a future here in the state of Alaska. I'm going to dive down into one of them just because we're short on time here, but changing the rules is an important part, and part of that is the binding caucus. Are you familiar with that concept?
I am, yep.
And what's your position on the binding caucus? Are you in favor? Are you against? Would you join a binding caucus? Would you not join? What's your take?
Well, I think anything that comes to the floor or through committee should be on the merits of what it is. It should not be through a coercive process. And so I don't see the binding caucus as healthy for any process when it comes to the best interest of the people.
So it's not something you would participate in?
It's not something I support.
All right, final thoughts here. I'm going to give you the floor, your elevator pitch for why people should vote for Heath Smith for State Senate in District C. You got about a minute here.
Well, our current senator's been there for almost 22 years. And if you look at the results of that, especially in the last 7, I don't know that we could agree on that being a very good any real good results out of that when it comes to the most pressing fiscal issues. And it's just time to drill down on those and get them done. And so it took a little courage for me to step up and run against an incumbent like that. And I'm asking people to have some courage to enact some change, and because it's time for us to move forward.
Right.
Because Alaska's future is your future, and it's mine, and I care deeply enough about it that I'm willing to get in there and do the work and finally get some results.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. 22 years of a certain type of insanity. We don't need to continue that. Heath Smith, I applaud you for jumping forward here, and we'd love to have you back on the program here after the primary, and we'll talk some more, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for coming on board and joining us. I appreciate it. Folks, we are out of time. The Michael Duke Show continues tomorrow, Firearms Friday. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. And Heath just hung up. I was going to give him another bite at the apple, but that's pretty much it. You know, again, he and I may disagree on things like the marine highway system, maybe not in total, but in part. I think that I don't know as we should look to government to fix a lot of the housing issues that are going on. I think if we get the government out of it, the market would fix most of that stuff. Trust me, it would. There would be it right there. But I think overall, a good choice for something new in District C. I think it's something that we need. All right, friends. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's program. If you did, please like and share. Give it a like, give it a share it with your friends and family. If you're out on Facebook, like and follow the show page. If you're on YouTube, do the YouTube things of mashing the subscribe button and then ringing the bell to get notifications. We appreciate you coming on board and joining us. It is The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Special thanks to our friends at Satellite West for sponsoring the program today. We'll be back with more tomorrow. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.